Hi, all, and welcome back to the channel. I'm sorry that I look like a sports commentator today, but I can assure you there will never, ever be any talk of sports on this channel, ever. Instead, today, I want to talk about. I won't use the word gateway because that has somewhat negative connotations. However, what I will use, perhaps, is the word introduction. What was your introduction to the music that you love today? That's probably a better way of putting it, I would think. Don't you agree? So, yeah, firstly, I'm going to talk about my introduction, how I got into Rush. Now, I can remember it distinctly. It was in a maths class, a class that I absolutely hated, and I still hate maths today. Um, to be honest, the only maths I engage in is knowing how much I'm being paid for the work that I do. That's all I need to know. How much goes to me, how little I can give the tax man, and we're good. So, anyway, my introduction to Rush, as I say, was in a maths class, and it was by a young lad called Andrew Dobson. And, Andrew, if by any very slim possibility that you're watching this channel, I'm blaming you for my introduction into Rush. I'm glad you did, because they're a great band. So, thank you, but I'm blaming you. Um, so, yeah, my introduction to Rush was very straightforward, actually. I remember I was sat by Andrew in the maths class, and in fact, I probably asked him more than the teacher on how I could solve these maths problems, which I still got wrong anyway. And I noticed on Andrew's pencil case this lettering saying Rush and this scribbled design, the Starman logo. And I just happened to ask him. I said, "Hey," I said, who's that? What band is that on your pencil case?" And he said to me, "Oh, that's the band Rush. They're from Canada." He says, "My sister's really into them." So, yeah, I thought, okay, I'll take that on board. Um, time progressed. I there was a family friend of ours whose girlfriend at the time, funnily enough, had the Archives box set, which consisted of the first three Rush albums. I heard her playing them, and I thought, yeah, they're interesting. I still wasn't sort of quite engaged in it at that point. I needed a proper, obviously, listen through for myself. So yeah, as years wore on, and I've done, a short on this and also a video about my three favorite Rush albums. The first one I ever bought was Power Windows. It wasn't their classic stuff, but it was a first for me, and I still like it. It is one of those albums. If somebody said which albums do you want to chuck out, it would be one of those. I would, even if they said it's not a very good album, I'd keep it, because it is, to me, it's that special album that I bought with my own money. It was my first Rush album. Anywho, I got into buying the rest of them in the end. My favourite of all time, yeah, it's going to be 2112. Absolute amazing album. Wow. What can I say? It's just so good, and they are a great band. And yeah, I love them. They're great, great. I love Rush. They're fantastic. Fantastic band. My next introduction happened to be when I was in my first work um, placement, my first job, so to speak. And it was an older gentleman who lived through the 70s, in his teens. And he happened to mention Deep Purple, and specifically Deep Purple in rock. And he said how wonderful it was. So when I had the money, and I was getting into sort of rock and metal at that time, bear in mind, this is, the 80s, 85 type of thing. So I was, quite into that sort of scene. So I went out and bought that. I bought Deep Purple in rock only on the strength that he'd mentioned how good it was. I particularly wasn't that impressed on my first listening. But I mean, bear in mind, you're comparing 70s classic rock with the stuff I was listening to, which was, 85's version of, Aerosmith and Van Halen. And, I mean, we're talking sort of almost, worlds apart in a way of style and musicianship and guitaring. But yeah, over time, especially now as I've got older, I really appreciate it because it's a really heavy album for the time period, and it's fantastic. And I would argue that I think it's better than Machine Head. But I did. I purchased Machine Head along later on. I enjoyed it. I didn't enjoy it as much as Deep Purple in Rock because it wasn't as heavy. I didn't think so anyway. And then I discovered Burn, which I was like, oh, there's something different here. Discovering it was, David Coverdale and Glenn Hughes who'd joined the band. And because of listening to Burn, which I appreciate more now, as I say, as I've got older, that led me into Whitesnake, early Whitesnake. And I got, their albums like, Saints and Sinners and all of that sort of early stuff. Bought Whitesnake, I think it was Whitesnake 87, when it was David Coverdale in his MTV phase of life and career. And I enjoyed that. So yeah, that was my introduction basically, not only to Deep Purple, but also to Whitesnake. Two bands in one. So Graham, I do still remember you. If you're out there and by any chance watching this, thanks. Brilliant. I'm glad I got into Deep Purple. Yeah, they're a great band. Really like them as well. So brings me on to my next band, which I'm placing really, I suppose, at number 2 at this point, and that would be The Doors. Now, The Doors was an interesting one for me because I first became aware of them through the film Apocalypse Now, and that opening scene and that wonderful song by The Doors, The End, fits in so perfectly with that scene of the helicopters flying over and yeah, fantastic. It really does fit with that scene so perfectly, and I was just entranced by that music because I just found it so bizarre, so strange. It was just like captivating. There's something about that song, The End, which is just otherworldly. Anyway, I've eventually found out, yeah, it was by The Doors, so I promptly went out and bought The Doors' greatest hits. And then I went along and bought, the albums as they are, and obviously discovered The End on the very first Doors album. And what a fantastic debut album that is. And yeah, fell in love with them, bought their albums, and yeah, still like The Doors today. Great band, great band. Another song by The Doors, which threw me somewhat, was "Hello, I Love You." Now, I heard that on a film starring John Belushi and Dan Aykroyd called Neighbours, and that's an 80s film. I think it might be 1981, but it's one of those obscure dark comedy type things. But anyway, I heard this song "Hello, I Love You," and I thought, oh, that's really interesting. Who's this new wave band? Because to me, and even now, I still think "Hello, I Love You" has a real new wave sound about it. And I was thinking, who is it? Who is it? Who's that? I've not heard of them. And then, of course, further on, I mean, bear in mind we haven't got the internet or anything back then. But I was thinking, who is it? And I thought, I've got to find out who this is. And I can't even remember how I found out who it was by. But I guess what might have happened is that I know I purchased the greatest hits, and I think I probably purchased the greatest hits. I mean, it was after hearing, The End and Hello, I Love You. So I'm guessing it's probably because I bought it on the greatest hits album. But I was so awestruck by how ahead of its time that song sounded. Now I know there's this, the lawsuit that was, filed because it sounded like a Kink song. I got to be honest. To me, it's always been "Hello, I Love You," and it sounded so ahead of its time. And I was just really blown away by the fact that it was recorded in the 60s. I was just like, wow, this is great. This group are really forward thinking. So, hey, yeah, in the end, yeah, found out it was the Doors again. And as I say, and I've said before, that was it for me. I was just instantly a Doors fan and got the other albums. So, at number one, bit of a tragic one in a way. Um, I'd sort of heard of the Beatles, and you know, I think probably most of the world's heard of the Beatles uh, with some song or other. So I was really drawn in to the Beatles world, collecting their stuff when I was in what you'd term, I guess, in the US as possibly high school. And, we all remember that day, December the 8th, 1980, hearing on the news that John Lennon had been shot dead outside the Dakota building. And it had a real ripple even amongst, the younger generation. And that did get me into the Beatles. As I say, I'd heard of them, appreciated their music, but it was it was sadly John's death that really got me into the band, into his own solo work. So there you go. As I say, three. Well, not three. What am I on about? Um, what was it? So let's have a look here. Sorry about this, guys. I'll recap. Yes, four. Sorry. So those four memories of how I got into or was introduced to those particular bands by various means, uh, and yeah, how I basically fell in love with those bands after being introduced to them, and still a fan today. So thank you for your patience. Thank you for your watching. Thank you for all your support. Whether you're in the, I don't know, 50s, hundreds, thousands, whatever. I appreciate you all anyway for tuning in. Consider subscribing, maybe liking. And I will see you again very soon. Bless you all and stay safe. See ya.